And Kosovo is a secular society, meaning it's not governed by any religion, and everybody is free to make their own religious choices. But Albanians, like all other people, have a culture, an identity which is shaped in part by the play of the religions to which Albanians belong, to which Kosovars belong. It has been the interplay of Islam, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Bektashis, and other religions here in Kosovo that have shaped your identity, those of you who are from Kosovo. And the same is true for the English-speaking peoples. For me, as somebody born in England and living most of my life in the United States, my identity, my culture, as a Briton or as an American, has also been shaped by religion in large part. And it's because of that powerful impact of religion on all of us, on our heritage, on our identity, that I think it's important that we study the history of religion. It's a real pleasure for me today to introduce somebody who is truly one of the great experts on the history of religion. Father Bob Wright is professor of church history at one of the most famous, oldest, most prestigious, shall we say, seminaries in America, the General Seminary of the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church is the name given to the Church of England in the United States. That means the church that Father Wright is going to be talking about, the early history of. Now, it's important to remember one thing, that when we're talking about the early history of Christianity in a country like Britain, we're talking about exactly the same church that all Illyrians belonged to in this room at that time. Because we're talking about a time when there was only one Christian church. This is before 1054, when the Western churches and the Eastern Orthodox churches parted company. And most of the time that Father Bob is going to be talking about today is also the time before the revelation to Muhammad and the spread of Islam into this region. So he's going to be talking about a time when this region and England shared common cultures in a religious sense. I'll just say one other thing about Bob Wright that some people on the faculty have learned over the past couple of days. He's also one of the world's leading experts on icons, on the religious paintings that are so integral to the Orthodox churches, whether Serbian Orthodox, Albanian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, or whatever. Some of you know about their tradition of painting, of illustration, known as iconography. And I know that one or two members of the faculty may be interested in talking later or offline with Bob about that. And I haven't picked you up to this yet, sir, but we might try to arrange a breakfast meeting or something like that tomorrow informally for those people who are interested in discussing icons, which is Bob's other true love. So with that, it's a great, I'm going to sit down and hand over to the Reverend Professor Dr. Robert Wright. Bob, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. It's an honor to be with all of you here today. My sort of official remarks you'll hear and can see on the papers here. As an American speaker once said, before I address you this morning, I do have something to say. So suggesting that whatever was really important was what he's going to say right then and not what he's going to say later. But I would say that just a preface to say what a pleasure it is for me to be here and to see the kind of unique opportunity that you have in a place like this, which in one sense is an emerging country, and in another sense is a long existing country. And that you have this opportunity in this university, which is a new university, but in another sense picks up the great threads and strands of history from so long ago. And this is my very first visit here. I hope it won't be my last. And I am just so happy to be with you and to receive your welcome here. Let me just say that I divided my remarks this morning into two parts. The one part will be the lecture, which is a written text that you have here, and it means that I lose a certain amount of eye contact with you by using this text, but on the other hand, at least you know what I'm saying, because you have it before you. And I have taken this way of lecturing quite often because my students have demanded it. They want to know, what did he say about this? What did he say about that? So here it is. This is it. But then the other part of this, the presentation today is visual. And so for the first part, we'll be looking this way. And then for the second part, I will be looking with you in that direction at the PowerPoint presentation. So that will be our procedure, if that's acceptable. And with that, and let me say a couple of other things. One is Chris very kindly made this introduction about my interests and so forth in terms of history, church history, and iconography and so forth. One other love of mine, which I don't pursue nearly as much as I used to, is that I used to be the basketball coach of our team in New York City. And if I weren't so old and I'd not broken my ankle, I've seen some of you out on the court here practicing, and I might try to join you, but I can't do that here. But I wish you well in your games. So with that, we will proceed. And I'm going to sit because although my ankle is healed, I can't stand on it for quite so long. So we begin then with the foundations of the Anglican Christian Church, Anglican tradition. The word Anglican means pertaining to or derived from the land of England, which was first called Angleland, hence England, Angleland. In the 9th century, after the tribes of peoples called Angles, who had invaded that land. The derivative adjective English first appears in the 17th century, obviously related to the Latin adjective Anglicanus, which we translate as Anglican. The derivative noun Anglicanism first appears in the 19th century. There are some 80 million Anglican Christians all over the world. My Anglican church in America is called the Episcopal Church, but it's an Anglican church. Last year, I was one of 4 historians who were invited to the Anglican Episcopal Church in Japan, called the Nippon Seiko Kai, to give historical presentations there in Kyoto and Tokyo for a symposium on Anglicanism. And rather than beginning from the latest perspective, I chose to start from the earliest perspective, especially since I have recently published a book on the Venerable Bede, whose ecclesiastical history of the English people is generally regarded as the gateway book to the early history of the Anglican tradition. And the study, the commentary that I have published is this book that I have in my hands here, and I am very pleased to present a copy of it to you and to your library here for your own edification. Bede has generally been known by the title of Venerable since the 9th Christian century. And historians agree that the title is appropriate to him, even though no one is quite sure how he got it. My students talk about him not as the Venerable Bede, but as the Venomous Bede. And this is their joke about the subject, right? It's called generally as the Venerable Bede. A team of Japanese scholars is now translating my companion to Bede, which I have given you for your library, into their language for publication over there. And I have revised the remarks that I gave in that country for my presentation here at the American University in Kosovo. I've been very excited to find out recently, I'm sure you probably have more technology over here than we do in my place in New York, that my own book that I've given you is now on Kindle. So you can read it. In fact, you can get it for virtually half price by buying the Kindle edition. But I should not be expecting you to translate this into some other language again. Even before the 8th century, when Bede finished his great work on early British history in the 8th century, there survived a number of archaeological sources, many only recently discovered, that have increasingly become known, whereby Anglicans can trace their early history as a Christian people in England back to the 2nd or 3rd century. So in other words, it's not just what is written, but also the archaeological evidence of it. And I suppose you probably have various archaeological investigations going on around you here and so forth. And often you can find out things from that kind of evidence that are not told at all in the written evidence. So both of these kinds of approaches are important. Our Anglican tradition has no history book, properly speaking, until Bede wrote his own, which he finished in the year 731 at the age of 60, some 4 years before his death. So Bede is the gateway book to the earliest written history of the English Christian tradition, and we can be thankful to him for recording his observations on the beginning. What this means, please take note, and this is my first major point, is that when one talks about the earliest foundations of Christianity in England, one is talking about two sorts of sources. One source is the early written evidence, and most of it is contained in the one magnificent book that the Venerable Bede wrote in the early 8th century. And the other source is much more diverse and variegated. It is a collection of unwritten evidences from archaeology, artifacts, church buildings that can be sifted and visually observed. And that's what we'll be looking at in the second half of the period this morning. First, the written evidence, largely from the history text written by Bede, which I am summarizing now. That's what we do first. Then secondly, from the unwritten artifacts that remain from the very same early period, and I shall show and comment upon this evidence in my visual presentation that follows this brief lecture, from about 50 pictures in a PowerPoint that round out the story. Bede was also a Bible scholar, and it is clear that he saw his work as a continuation of the biblical book of Acts, as well as being a parallel to the ecclesiastical history of Eusebius, whose work preceded Bede as being the first general worldwide history of Christianity, but not specific to England. It is Bede that gives us the tradition of dating Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, A.D., which has continued down to now. His early history of England and the English Church is the first major work to use dating, A.D., and that's in the year of our Lord, and very important.